So before we got to Lisbon, you had mentioned that Lisbon was considered like the European San Francisco.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah, where
So
it's kind of
hilly.
hilly and even more, which I was surprised when we pulled in. When we were coming in on the ship, there was like a small Golden Gate Bridge,
Mm-hmm.
or it looks just like the Golden Gate Bridge, only much smaller,
Mm-hmm.
and that we go under.
Yeah.
And
That was so
that was
unexpected and
nice.
fun.
That was
Yeah.
nice. So we went under that, and then just off on the right hand side of the bridge as you're coming in is this huge statue of Jesus with his arm out, looking
Mm-hmm.
out over the bay,
Mm-hmm.
and
Very cool.
that was that made it better than San Francisco for sure. So so we come into Lisbon, and sure enough, it's kind of built on a hillside there, but you only see a little bit from the ship, from the
Mm-hmm.
port. It goes up over the hill and then expands out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're excited to get into Lisbon. I don't I don't know about you, but I was really looking forward to seeing Lisbon and Portugal in
Mm-hmm.
general.
Mm-hmm.
I had high expectations for Portugal, and we saw some nice stuff in Portugal for
Yes,
sure.
we did.
So
Yes, we did.
we decided to take a tour,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a walking tour through Portugal. And the first thing that you see across the street are these tall buildings,
Mm-hmm.
and there is
It's hard to see the opening, like
yeah,
where to get through.
there's a small opening that goes through the buildings.
It's about,
It's a little wider than my shoulders.
yeah, not
Actually,
much more
not.
than two people.
I
I
don't
don't think
nah,
two
two
people could
people
go
can.
through.
No, it's just one person at a
Yeah.
time, and that
So
was the
narrow.
intent of it.
So narrow.
And what our guide told us was when invading armies would come in,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't matter how many they had to go through that one at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's where they would
Mm-hmm.
catch them
Mm-hmm.
going through that. And so
And now
um,
that the wall is down, there's another street on the far
yeah,
side.
there's other
Um,
ways to get in,
but yeah, still an original. Yeah.
but to get to the castle at the top, that's how you had to go,
Mm-hmm.
which was above
Mm-hmm.
Lisbon. So some of the other things that were interesting about Lisbon, um, when we first came up and he had mentioned, he talked about how a lot of the houses have tile on them.
Mm-hmm.
And there were two purposes for that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, One was,
Keeping the moisture out from being a coastal town, and the other was the heat.
the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah, help keep the buildings cooler
Mm-hmm.
with the light tiles.
Mm-hmm. And it is everywhere.
Yeah.
On the churches, not all, but most of the residential houses. And yeah, it's everywhere. It's beautiful.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Beautiful.
And so we first walked into the where the Jewish quarter was,
Mm-hmm.
or used to be
Mm-hmm.
at the time,
Yeah, the
and
water fountain there.
the water fountain and kind of a little
And
opening
a part
there,
of the old wall. Yeah,
part of
that
the old
was-
wall. And one thing that I noticed when we were in there was regarding the buildings,
Mhm.
and the buildings had a little bit, to me, older look to them than like a typical like Paris or England or places like that. And the reason was the type of stone that they used on their buildings. It deteriorates a little bit faster. It was
It's limestone. Yeah,
limestone,
it's
so
limestone.
it didn't hold up as well.
Mhm.
And so you could certainly see that. And there's those guys have, the city people in Portugal have a challenge with the upkeep of those buildings, but they were doing a good job. I mean, Portugal looked nice. I was pleased with the look of the buildings. It just kind of had that old, kind of authentic look, I guess I might say. So it
It
was,
was what you expected.
yeah, it was what I expected
Mhm.
out of Portugal. So anyway, we went on the tour, and Portugal's known for a couple things.
Mhm.
One, the trolley cars that go through, like San Francisco.
Mhm.
They have trolley cars that go through. And another one was the
Vernacular.
vernacular,
Yeah, that goes-
which is a trolley car, but it goes uphill, so it stays level and it goes up a hill, kind of like that.
Mhm.
And so we rode that later.
Mhm.
But before we got there, we also noticed on the streets that the sidewalks were made of, yeah,
Beautiful.
a
They're made of
combination.
the limestone and the basalt, the black and white, very unique blocks that were apparently, the patterns were put together by prisoners back in the day. That was their way to help rebuild. And the fantastic patterns that were everywhere, like different areas of the city had different patterns. And even like the pedestrian crosswalk area wasn't painted on, it was done in stone.
The limestone.
Yeah, the limestone
Yeah.
pattern in the cobblestone streets. It was just
And I believe he
beautiful.
said that it was the inmates who came up with the idea of doing a pattern, and they did a little area and showed it
And then it would
to
just,
this, and they liked it, and so then they
yeah.
told him to keep going with
And
that.
wasn't it initially like just in the palace courtyards so that the prince could ride, or the king
Yeah,
could ride his
so
elephant? Wasn't
right,
that?
so we walked down to along the river, and we came out in this massive courtyard area where there was a palace around there, and then there was a big archway that went to that entered a street that went up into the city, and yeah, so he had them add all of this limestone and basalt up there so he could ride his elephant up the street, and
Without
with the big
slipping,
buildings
yeah.
around and stuff. So it was a little bit odd that he rode his elephant, and the guy told us
Eccentric.
later, eccentric. The guy told us later that he donated that elephant to
A pope.
the Pope, and they recently found the remains of that elephant buried in
Yeah. Interesting.
in the Vatican. So that was
So
that
the
was
story goes.
so
Yeah.
that's what he said. I thought that was kind of interesting. But it also, along with that, though, is in typical European fashion that you have, tall buildings and alleyways, and that are, the streets. It's smaller, and that European look. It definitely had that as well.
Yeah. The guide was telling us about the buildings where, when they were rebuilding after the Great Flood and tsunami and fires.
All in one shot,
Yeah.
right?
All on
They had the
same
big
day.
earthquake,
And then, of course, the
and that caused the
tsunami.
fire,
Yeah.
right? That burned a bunch of the city, and then the tsunami came, and I'm not sure that the tsunami put it out, but I don't know that it made it that
Yeah.
far up the hill. But they had a tsunami all in that same time.
And the buildings that did survive were re-erected, had the names of the type of business in the,
Yeah, originally
yeah,
those
that were
buildings had that.
carved
Yeah, it was
into the
interesting. Like he
stone.
showed us one, and it said it was a bakery on the front,
Where
but
clearly it wasn't
now
a bakery.
it wasn't a bakery anymore. And he said that's because the fire burned it, so the business went away. And when they rebuilt it, they left the original name on the building.
Right, but it's carved into the
Yeah,
building.
it's carved
so
into the building,
just
and so then a new
beautiful.
business went in there. So
Yeah.
he said now, just because the building says bakery or whatever it may be, that's not necessarily what's in there. And then we kind of walked into another big square as we went past the area where the king rode the elephant, kind of kitty corner, and there was another massive area there. And in the far corner of that was the vernacular. The vernacular took us up the hill, which we rode it up the hill, and up to a place where they used to bury. It was a place where they buried people who died from pandemic and diseases and
Yeah,
things
and
like
even
that.
infectious diseases,
Infectious
the plague.
diseases, the
Yeah.
plague. It was known as kind of an area that nobody wanted to hang out. And a while back, the businesses got together and said, "Hey, you know what? Let's kind of remake this area and let's redo this area." So they did, and it turns out we were up there. It turns out that it had one of the best views.
It was beautiful.
Beautiful view out, looking out over the
Expansive.
city and the river, and it was
Really
spectacular
nice.
actually.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that was going on when we were there that we didn't mention was June is the celebration
Oh, Lisbon. Yeah.
in Lisbon,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
June 6th was the Queen's, right? Wasn't that the Queen's?
No, it was the Lisbon celebration.
The Lisbon celebration. Yes, that's right. I was thinking of Gibraltar. Yes, so they had the Lisbon celebration, so they were setting up stages for bands and all sorts of things. And so
Yeah, lots of
It was great to be able
decorations.
to see all of that as
Yeah.
well, and there was a lot of excitement in the city, and people were preparing for that and whatnot. And so then after that, we went back to the cruise ship.
Hmm.
Anything else you want to mention about Lisbon?